your age, you don't want to
Knock them down, but it's hard.
Did you have power yet, George?
4:55.
Okay.
We
good.
I had something. My wife were going to go check in at a hotel. We were
Yeah.
going to go to Hampton Inn, but
Yeah. No need.
then I got the call.
Good,
So,
good.
What time did you get it?
4:55.
Yeah.
At least that's what the message from CLMP said.
So
or
you're
Eversource
up,
said.
are you still up that way?
Up on Rocky Dundee,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Do you
off
think
of the
that
mountain.
Mountain Road is?
Yeah.
Okay.
They took it off the map. It had the outage on the map, and I looked on the map, and it's
Where else
off.
that bus?
So you should
Ready?
be good.
Can we have the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone. Kathy Devlin, Select Woman. Pat McHale, our Labor Attorney. Kim LaFleur, our Operations Director. George Schobert, Attorney. Mr. and Mrs. Kratos. Close the door there.
Yep.
I'm sorry, Jackie Napa is his issue.
So, George, we're here to hear the appeal of the decision of the Board of Selectmen of your client regarding his separation from employment back on June 20th of this year. You have an opportunity to, on behalf of your client or through your client, to provide the Board of Selectmen with your thoughts as to why they should reconsider their decision.
Okay. I just wanted to go over some ground rules to make sure that we understood exactly what was going to happen tonight, Pat. I have your letter of June 28th, and it's my understanding that in this hearing, or in this appeal hearing, we are not allowed to call any witnesses other than I may call my client as a witness. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And we're not allowed to question the first selectman on his decision. Is that also correct?
Correct.
The board may question either my client or the first selectman.
If they choose.
Correct, yes. And then if the board does do that and questions my client, I think, or the first selectman, we're allowed to provide rebuttal
Absolutely.
to that.
Yes.
My understanding is the board will move to executive session after the appeal hearing.
Correct.
And the board will not issue a decision tonight.
Correct.
So there's no reason for us to hang around.
Correct.
And then within 15 working days, the board will schedule another meeting for the purpose of voting on the outcome of the appeal.
That's correct.
Now, I was a little confused. Will the meeting be scheduled within 15 days, or will it actually occur within 15 working days?
The decision will be made within 15 working days.
Okay. So that would be sometime after the election, based on the fact there's 4 working days in a week, and the election is 3 weeks, less than 3 weeks out.
I don't know about any election, so it'll be 15 days from today.
Oh, within 15.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Just so we're clear, the Board of Selectmen has also given your client the right to have a full-blown evidentiary hearing before a neutral arbitrator where witnesses can be called, cross-examined, briefs can be filed, if that's something your client would be interested in, as you know from my letter
Correct.
that you were reading from.
Correct. Thank you. All right. Mr. Kratos, you mind if I call you Tim?
It's fine.
All right, Tim. Do you know when you were hired by the town of Somers?
It was on November. Wait, I'll check my notes. It was at least 5 years ago.
If I told you it was September 18th of 2013, does that sound right?
That sounds right.
And were you hired as the emergency management director at that time?
No,
What position were you hired for?
like an administrative assistant to help in obtaining funds and getting grants.
And was that a full-time or a part-time position?
Part-time.
And at some point, were you appointed the emergency management director of the town of Somers?
I was.
And do you remember when that was?
That was around, I believe it was, that was August of 14.
2014?
Yes.
Now, during the time that you worked for the town of Somers, did you ever have a negative performance evaluation?
No.
Prior to May 30th, 2019, were you ever reprimanded for anything that you can recall as an employee of the town of Summers?
No.
Did you receive raises from the
Yes.
town of Summers? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and were those annual raises?
Yes. Including a bonus.
Okay. Now, at some point, at the end of May, did you receive an email from the first selectman?
Yes.
And do you recall what the nature of that email, this is the end of May 2019, do you recall what the nature of that email was?
Yes, it had to do with a MOA agreement with CROG that I had not submitted in time and was delinquent and was very upset about it.
Who was upset about that?
Mr. North.
Okay. Now, did you then receive anything else in writing from Mr. Knorr regarding that incident?
Yes. He wanted me to meet with him on or about June 11th and give me an opportunity to
Well, let me stop you there. Let me
Yeah.
ask you, and I'd like to, I don't know what we're doing about a record, Pat, but I wanted to submit this. I mean, everybody has this, but it's a June 6th memorandum. Have you
Yes.
seen this before, Tim?
Yep.
And what does the June 6th memorandum say? What's the general gist of the June 6th 2019 memorandum?
Well, this memo compared to the email was completely different. In my mind, now there was a lot more specifics involved, and then he had additions to my organization, my direction and control, population protection, training exercises. And at the time, I got just an email about a late MOA that was not submitted in time.
And going back to that late MOA, that's the memorandum of what is that again? The memorandum
Memorandum of agreement.
of agreement, and that was with who? Who was that letter?
That goes to the Capital Region Council of Governments, who's a partnership and collaboration with the Council of Governments through the Capital Region, which then is attached to the other emergency management homeland documents for grant purposes. It's a boilerplate form that's sent out every year. And I missed it.
And have you completed that form in the past?
Yes.
And do you know if, given the fact that you missed whether or not the town of Summers still received the funds in that grant?
I'm not sure if they did. I'm sure they probably did. It's just a boilerplate form for the CROG region. And the town still afforded the opportunity to go ahead with the grant and move forward with it and get funds.
Okay. Now, the memorandum lists 4 duties, does it not, on page 1?
You're talking about the memorandum from
From
Mr.
June
Knorr?
6th, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Does that list 4 duties that Mr. Knorr states in there that you have not been performing?
Correct. And this is the first time I ever saw that or was notified about that.
So Mr. Knorr had never talked to you about your lack of performance in these areas before?
Absolutely not.
And you'd never received an email or any other
No.
notification
No.
regarding that?
No.
All right. So, let me ask you. So the first one, emergency organization, planning, and management. Now, were you performing those functions?
Yes, I was.
And the second one is direction, control, and warning. Were you performing those functions?
Yes.
Were you performing the third one, which is population protection?
Yes.
How about the fourth one, training and exercises?
Yes.
All right. So after you received this memorandum, what did you do?
As it's stated here, I was given an opportunity to rebut the accusations that he stated, and then before Mr. Knorr decided what actions to take based on his concerns, he wanted to give me the opportunity to respond to them, which I did in memo, in rebuttal, and to make arrangements to meet with him on June 11th at 2 o'clock.
And when you say you responded in memo, in rebuttal,
Mm-hmm.
when did you respond in a memo in rebuttal?
Well, it's dated June 11th, but I think I did this on June 9th or 10th.
When did you give this memo to Mr. Knorr?
No, I handed it to him during the meeting,
During the meeting when?
when I met with him on June 11th.
On June 11th. So that was the first time that Mr. Knorr had seen this memo?
Yes.
All right. Now, going back to the June 6th memo from Mr. Knorr, if you would turn to page 2, the last paragraph, do you see where it says, "Before I decide what actions to take based on my concerns, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to them"?
Yes.
All right, and then please make arrangements to meet with me on June 11th, 2019 at 2 p.m. so that you may do so?
Yes.
And so is that when you met with Mr. Knorr?
Yes.
And is that when you gave him your June 11th memorandum?
Yes.
All right. Now, I'm going to ask that this be submitted as an exhibit as well, and I'm going to ask you to take a look at this. I don't know. You want me handing directly to your clients?
You
Want me to hand to
can
you and
just
you
re-
can
they
pass
have
out?
all these
I
documents,
figured
George,
as
so you
much.
can just refer to the document.
All right.
You don't need to
Yeah, we have.
be worried about the exhibits.
Fair enough.
The Board of Selectmen has them
Okay.
in front of them.
Okay. So does that look like the memo that you prepared for Mr. Knorr?
Yes.
And in this memorandum, did you set out the, what you feel you had accomplished and had overseen during your time as the Emergency Management Director for the town of Summers?
Yes.
Okay. So tell us about what happened at the meeting on June 11th.
I came into the office. I think Miss LaFleur was there also. I walked into Mr. Knorr's office, and I believe Miss LaFleur followed me and closed the door behind her, and I was surprised that she was there, because I thought, at that time, I thought it was just, I didn't realize it was getting to this type of point. I thought we were talking about a MOA that had been not submitted. And I asked what Ms. LaFleur was doing there, and I was notified at that time that she also acted as the Human Resources Director, which I never knew. And so, as I handed the memo over to Mr. Knorr, and Mr. Knorr started reading it, and then Ms. LaFleur asked if he could read it out loud, and which he did. And there was hardly any eye contact or discussion. And basically, Ms. LaFleur said afterwards that Mr. Knorr was giving me an opportunity to either resign or be terminated, or take a termination. And if I resigned, it wouldn't go public. And if I accepted termination, then it would be open to the public and the press. And I was kind of in shock at that time. I really was. I didn't believe this was happening. We got into an interaction, me and Miss LaFleur, and I'm not exactly sure what it was over, but she abruptly left the room. And I was trying to talk to Mr. Knorr. He turned his back to me and he went to pick up papers and stuff on the back table. He said, "I have another meeting to attend to. Your services are no longer needed." And left. In this time, I told them that during the MOA about my injuries. You know, I haven't been on top of my game. That's no concern of us. Your injuries, you know, they don't care about that.
Who said that?
Mr. Knorr.
Now, in the June 6th memorandum, it stated that Mr. Knorr had stated before he decided what actions to take based on his concerns, he wanted to give you an opportunity to respond. Did you get that opportunity?
I had no opportunity to respond.
You just drafted that memo
I
and turned it
drafted
in.
the memo, gave it to Mr. Knorr. He read it. He was reading it by himself. Ms. LaFleur asked him to read it out loud. He read it out loud. And then basically after that, your services are no longer needed. And she left the room. Ms. LaFleur left the room. I tried to talk to Bud, and he turned his back on me again. Wouldn't even make eye contact with me. Bent over, picked up his pile of paperwork, and said, "I have another meeting to attend to," and left.
So do you feel like the decision had been made prior to you entering that room on June 11th that your job was terminated? Once you got in and saw what happened?
It just seemed odd to me that I had no chance to explain or go into further detail of what I was talking about. None whatsoever.
Okay, so you left the office then. Well, let me back up. Was there anyone else in the room with you, Miss LaFleur, and Mr. Knorr during the time of that June 11th conference?
No, not that I recall. I don't know if TFC Heavey, he's a trooper, I don't know if he was standing in Miss LaFleur's office or met me outside, but I was escorted out for me to hand in my keys to the EOC. Wait
a minute. Before you go there, let me just. I don't mean to interrupt, but
Mhm.
but nobody else was in the office itself behind the closed door, but the three of you. You,
Correct.
Miss LaFleur, and Mr. Knorr.
Correct.
All right. So you then Miss LaFleur had exited the office.
Yes.
Prior, Mr. Knorr told you your services were no longer needed,
Correct.
and then he turned your back on you and was shuffling papers and.
Picking up paperwork as my cue to leave.
Okay,
No
and then-
further discussion.
So then you left at that point?
I did.
And when you exited the office, you saw Trooper Heavey?
I don't know exactly where I saw him, if it was outside this office or in the hallway or outside, but I was escorted out.
Well, how were you escorted out? What did Trooper Heavey say to you?
Nothing until we got to the EOC. When
Well, how did you know to go to the EOC?
I was told to turn in my keys and my credentials.
Who told you that?
I think it was TFC Heavey.
Okay,
At
Mr.
that
Knorr
time.
didn't tell you that from what you remember.
Not that I remember.
Okay,
no.
so TFC Heavey was somewhere outside of Mr. Knorr's office, between the outside of Mr. Knorr's office and the front door of Town
I
Hall?
believe so. Yes.
And you believe you might have had a conversation with him regarding turning in your keys?
I know I did because I had to hand them over to him, and we were outside of the EOC. I don't know if we were here or across the street. The EOC is right across the street at Kibbe Fuller
And what
School.
is the EOC? What is that? What does EOC stand for?
The EOC is the Emergency Operations Center,
And
which
that's
is
at Kibbe Fuller?
at Kibbe Fuller School.
Okay.
And there's two different parts. There's one that has all the radio equipment and some computer equipment. Then there's another part across the hall, which is the EOC, what I call command center, where we set up TVs and had video brought in special lines, new tables and chairs and such to make it a more efficient and professional for some event.
Okay. So is that where you typically worked out of?
I typically worked out of the main center, not the conference center, the conference room.
The EOC, though, and you didn't work out of Town Hall. You worked out of the EOC at Kibbe Fuller.
Correct.
Okay. And so you had keys to that building,
Yes.
and you had a badge? An employee badge? Or
Yes.
okay, and did TFC Heavey requisition that from you as well?
Yes.
The badge and the keys?
And the keys.
And
I
what
was
did-
asked to.
I'm sorry?
I was asked to hand those over. He would escort me in to get any private belongings that I might still have in the office at that time after I left Mr. Knorr's office, because I didn't realize I was going to be terminated. But he brought me over there and asked me. I had for the keys and the badge. And I went in and I got my personal belongings. And he said, anything else that you might need, you can come back tomorrow with other staff to retrieve it.
With other staff?
Yes.
Okay. Now, at that point in time, had you submitted any resignation to the town of Summers?
Oh, I first told Mr. Knorr when I was given the ultimatum of either resign or be terminated. I'm like, I guess I'll resign. It was a shock to me. And then after going home and talking to my wife and family, I'm like, no, I'm not going to resign.
So initially, though, while you were still in the room with Mr. Knorr, at that, you had stated to him that you would resign rather than be
Yes.
terminated.
Yes.
Okay. So then you went across the street with TFC Heavey. You got a few personal belongings, turned in your keys and your badge, and then what did you do?
Went home.
And did you submit at some point any resignation in writing?
I did through an email.
And when did you do that?
It was that same day.
And who did you send that email to?
Mr. Knorr, and I believe I CC'd Mr. Before.
And what did that, if you remember, generally, what did the email say?
I hereby tender my resignation not under duress, but with honor and integrity, and it was simple. It was a simple.
Okay. Now, at some point, did you have reason to think about that decision and change your mind?
Yes.
And when was that?
It's after I went home, and went at home, and talking to my family and friends, and I then sent another email rescinding my resignation and said I'd rather be terminated. Or I didn't say rather be terminated. I said I rescind my resignation.
Okay. So that was the same day or
Same
night?
day.
June
Same night.
11th?
Yes.
All right. Now, what was the next communication that you received from the town of Summers, from anyone at the town of Summers, after June 11th?
After June 11th, it was June 17th.
And what occurred on June 17th?
I got both an email and a letter from the town marked personal and confidential of the notice of intent to recommend dismissal from your employment as the emergency management director for the town of Summers.
All right. And is that this 4-page... Is that this 4-page letter?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in this letter, there are a number of bullet points with headings, correct?
Yes.
And do those bullet points and headings sort of correspond to bullet points that you had prepared in your June 11th memo?
Yes.
And is the general gist of this letter that Mr. Knorr took what you had stated in your June 11th memo were some of your accomplishments and what you oversaw, and then sort of rebutted those items?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to ask you to take a look at the second paragraph on page 1.
Mm-hmm.
And do you see where it says on the third line down, or it starts at the end of the second line down, but that you have attempted to take credit for work that has been performed largely by others on behalf of the town, but in fact have performed very little work yourself? Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Is that accurate?
No, it's not.
Now, the first bullet point is training, correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, Mr. Knorr states that in 2 places in your June 11th memorandum, you take credit for providing training and drills pertaining to sheltering, including the sheltering of animals. In your June 11th memorandum, do you take credit for that?
No. My June 11th memo was meant to be a bullet point of things that were accomplished, not just me, as a committee and as a team. I didn't do this stuff. In coordination with everybody else, it was done together. And so that's what it was meant to be. I don't see anywhere where it says I did this or I did that.
And when you say you don't see anywhere, you're looking at your June 11th
Yes.
memo? So under training,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't say that you did any of that, does it, on the June 11th memo?
No.
Now, where was training, were there discussions regarding training?
Absolutely.
And where would those discussions typically take place?
We would share that at our monthly EPAC committee meetings.
And what's an EPAC committee meeting?
The Emergency Preparedness Advisory Council meetings, which we do once a month. Usually used to be the first Friday of every month, then we changed it because the town hall closed. So it was the first Thursday of every month at 8 o'clock at the fire department, where all the principals involved in emergency management, the police chief, fire chief, selectmen, the people from Public Works, everybody involved. And it was to go around and have a group discussion about what the needs of the town were, what we needed to do, and where we were going.
And so would training typically be discussed?
Training was always discussed and shared with the committee, and then given out to the other principals that were involved to do what they needed to do, or if they wanted to decide to take that training.
Is it fair to say that as far as training went, you may not have actually run the exercise, but you knew what was going on?
Yes.
And all of that would typically have been discussed at your monthly meetings?
Yes.
Okay. And is that what you were trying to convey to Mr. Knorr in your June 11th memo?
Yes.
Now, on page 2 of Mr. Knorr's letter to you, dated June 17, still under training, it says, in fact, you have never even reviewed the shelter manual and annual animal sheltering manual developed by Ann Logan. So those are two different manuals? One a shelter manual?
Yeah, there was a shelter manual, and then there was a thinner manual for animal sheltering.
And are you familiar with those documents?
I am.
Have you reviewed those documents?
I have.
And when you reviewed them, did you make any notations?
I did.
And did you turn those notations into anybody?
I shared them, I think, during a meeting with Ann. I wrote notes down. I shared them with Ann. I don't think I actually gave her the notes from. I put it inside the binder.
Okay. So it's not accurate that you never even reviewed these manuals?
No, it's not.
Right. Now, right below that, in the next paragraph, it states you also claim responsibility for training in stocks. Now, what are stocks?
Stocks is it's a fire department system, and it allows the fire department to talk to other fire departments. I'm talking in the fire department issue, to communicate over frequencies that they don't share together. So our CERT team, led by Karen Hocking, got trained in stocks, so they could be called out and go with the fire department if they wanted to, bring the stocks machine with them if it was needed in an event that the fire department couldn't communicate with other first responders.
All right. Now, what's a CERT team?
That's the Community Emergency Response Team.
And what is that?
It's a volunteer group, and they do wonderful, wonderful work. And my role in that was to, besides the monthly meetings, the EPAC committee meetings, I would meet with Karen Hocking, who's a CERT team leader, individually in our office about her needs, what she needed, and usually it would come out of the town's emergency management or preparedness budget to pay for those needs.
Okay. So, did you claim in your memo responsibility for training in stocks?
No.
And in fact, did you train in stocks?
No.
Okay. So you're just pointing out that you were you aware of the training?
Yes.
And again, was that discussed with Karen Hocking?
Yes.
And was it discussed at your monthly meetings of
Yes.
of the EPAC?
Yes. And the fire chief was there also, John Roach.
There being at the monthly
at
meetings?
the EPAC committee meeting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. The next bullet point is entitled upgrades. And it says in Mr. Knorr's letter that you claim to have been responsible for the creation of the EOC Command Center, which you claim never existed before. But Mr. Knorr's investigation reveals that the EOC at Kibbe Fuller was set up by members of the Public Works Department under the direction of Dan Thayer in 2012, well before you were hired as the emergency management director. Despite your bold claims, you were not involved in setting up the EOC. Now, did you claim that you set up the EOC?
No.
Okay. In your bullet point regarding the upgrades portion, what were you trying to get across?
It wasn't what I meant by the EOC. It was basically the command center meeting conference room across the hall. The EOC, the radio equipment and everything else, was there way before I was appointed. I think Dan Thayer and I think Frank Falcone were involved in that. I'm not a radio tech, so all the communications and upgrades to the EOC itself, there's two different rooms in the EOC. There's one that has all the radio and communications equipment and computers. Across the hall, we designated a meeting room or fixed it up to be more of a command center, and that's what I was talking about. And that basically included just upgrading it to look professional, to meet the needs of everybody that had to be there in case of an emergency. The TVs, the internet connections, the Wi-Fi connections. I didn't put those in. I can't put those in. I'm not qualified to put those in. The large screen TVs, it was in coordination with everybody else.
But you were involved with that.
I was involved with that.
Is it fair to say that command center did not exist before you were hired as EMD?
I would say so, yes.
Okay, and it was your involvement with everybody else putting that command center in place?
Yes.
Okay, and that's what you were trying to get across in your bullet point
Yes.
of June 11th?
Yes.
Now, the next bullet point is drills.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to, Mr. Knorr states, in addition to falsely claiming responsibility for the annual sheltering drill. So I'm going to stop right there. Did you claim responsibility for the annual sheltering drills?
No.
Okay. Well, what are the annual sheltering drills?
This just came up recently, and I don't know if it happened prior to me being appointed as the director, but I can't remember of any sheltering drills before. I don't know if Ms. LaFleur she's been here a lot longer than I have, but it came up at the EPAC meetings where we would start implementing that. And this idea came up through talking with Ann Logan and Karen Hawking, and we started doing sheltering drills at the high school. And not just sheltering drills, we also included animal sheltering drills, which I attended. I was there, and I don't take credit for doing that. I take credit of being involved with it and help implementing it.
And at some point, someplace, somewhere, these sheltering drills must have been discussed. They didn't just come out of the thin air. Where did that occur?
At our monthly EPAC committee meetings.
You would talk about sheltering drills.
Yes.
And you were the chairman of
Yes.
that commission. Okay. So continuing, you also take credit for annual statewide exercises. Now, were you attempting to take credit for annual statewide exercises?
The governor in the state runs that. I don't.
What are these annual statewide exercises?
The annual statewide exercises usually occur around between June and September, and it's for the whole state to be involved with. Not just the town of Summers, it's everybody within the whole state, along with DEMIS.
DEMIS is what?
Department of Emergency Management and Homeland Security from the state, the governor's office, all the utilities, and we set up what's called Web EOC. And that's a computer system within our office that allows us to contact the state immediately. And when they have these drills, it's the purpose of testing out that system to text in what are called SIT reps, situation reports. So the
It just says you claim to have equipment, but
Mhm.
now. In truth, he states, in truth, you had nothing to do with such acquisitions except to approve the requests made by the CERT team leader, Karen Hawking. Now, you did approve those requests, correct?
I did.
Did you have anything else to do with this equipment?
Yes, I discussed them with Karen Hawking. As I stated before, she teaches I don't know if it's a yoga class or whatever, in the same building where the EOC is. So she would drop in every once in a while, first text me or email me and say, do you have some time available? We'd sit down and discuss their needs and shared ideas about what the CERT team needed. And I told her, well, I think that will fit with the new budget, and we'll see what we can do to get them.
And so you would then submit the request of those items that you and she agreed were items that her team could use.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Grants. You take credit for obtaining a generator grant in fiscal year 2016 emergency performance grant. This is again Mr. Knorr stating, based on my investigation, you had little or nothing to do with our attainment of these grants. Now, did you have anything to do with the attainment of the generator grant?
I wrote it.
You wrote the generator grant. Is it fair to say that if you had not written the generator grant, there would have been no generator grant?
That's fair to say.
Somebody else would have had to do what you did.
Yes.
And how about the fiscal year 2016 emergency performance grant? What type of grant is that? Do you know?
Yes, that's it's an annual grant that comes every year, and it goes through the emergency management from me to the first selectman. When I first got appointed, we were many years behind, as Ms. LaFleur knows, from Ms. Pellegrini's tenure. So we caught up with all those and got reimbursements from the EMPG grants that were lingering for years.
You say we caught up on those. Who caught up on those?
I did.
Okay, you did the grant writing? Or submissions?
I did the submissions and corresponded with Demas and with the help of Ms. LaFleur, and as far as doing the correspondence and mailing. But I had to go back into the boxes and files downstairs and dig up old payroll records and cell phone records and things of that nature for I don't know how many years it was, two or three, that weren't reimbursed for yet, that the town was owed money for.
Okay. Now, those grants are probably not the 2016 grant. Do you have any specific recollection of or are they? Am I missing something here?
No, because the state's like 2 years behind.
Okay, so do you have a specific recollection regarding the 2016 emergency grant? And in fact, let's go back to your memo. And you do state in there have been grants that have been signed, such as the generator grant and the fiscal year 16 emergency performance grant, which you helped with. And did in fact you help with that grant?
Well, I'm the one that had to write it and submit all the information for it.
So in fact, the statement that you had nothing to do. No, wait a minute, wrong line. The statement that you had little or nothing to do with the attainment of these grants, that's not accurate.
I don't believe so.
Okay. Now, after hours for storms, you claim that you were always, according to Mr. Knorr, you claim you were always present at major storms and ensured that the safety of the town was protected. And in fact, were you present at major storms?
Yes.
And by present at major storms, I mean, I was present at the major storms out shoveling snow too, but that's not what you mean here. What do you mean by present?
What I mean is the prior directors of emergency management never went, as far as my knowledge and from what I was told from prior people holding that position or involved, that it was the EOC, nobody was ever there.
Ever at the EOC?
At the EOC. Just
So,
even if you man it to completely open it or have a partial opening, meaning basically I would go there, turn on the radio systems, go on to WebOut EOC, and even if it was a major snowstorm, at least I knew I was in contact and listening to DBW or the police to see if anything was going on within the town.
So you were at the command center during these storms?
Yes.
And was that typically every major storm?
Yes.
And in fact, sometimes would you leave the command center?
Oh, yes.
And what would you do?
Actually, I borrowed Todd Rowland's 4x4 because I had a Toyota Corolla that couldn't go through the snow, but it was a town vehicle. So I would leave and I would drive around like the cop I used to be, just to see if everything was okay, and go back to the EOC again while having radio communications and do what I do.
Okay. And then you mentioned Web EOC, and what would you do with, what is Web EOC? I think you might have explained a little bit about that, but what is it and what would you do with that?
WebEOC is a system that was developed by the Connecticut Emergency Management Division. And
I'm sorry, the Connecticut Emergency Management
Yes.
Division? That's
Yes.
of the state?
Of the state, yep. It's a computer system where you log in, each town logs in, and it's basically a situational report. So you log in your town's name, and everybody logs in, and they set up reports like every hour or half hour. Pole down on 190. Police responded to such and such due to that storm. And all of that's filtered through the system and is shared by everybody. So I could go on to Suffield or Enfield and look at their reports too to see what's going on over there. So it's basically, it's a communication system between everybody.
Okay. Now, Mr. Knorr writes that you never asked to conduct an after-action review. Now, do you know what an after-action review is? First off, did you ever ask to conduct one?
No.
And who would you have conducted one? What is an after-action review?
In all my time there, and even as a state trooper, after-action reviews come after a major incident. In this case, acting as the EOC director, after-action review came basically after all of our major drills that happened yearly with the state. So I would submit those, but during my tenure, there really wasn't anything major that happened in town. So there was no after-action review to do. I don't know if this is a DPW thing that they do after each storm, after they're done plowing the roads, to say, oh, okay, this truck broke down, that one broke down. It's just me by myself, working part-time. So I don't do an after-action review by myself and say, okay, this is it. And it's pretty much said in the WebEOC is kind of, surmises your after-action review. You're telling them everything that's going on.
Okay. Mr. Knorr also states that you never checked in after the event to obtain a situation report on any of the storm events the town experienced during which you were the town's emergency management director. Is that true?
That I didn't know who to check in with, first of all. I only report to the first selectman. I didn't ask if Todd Rowland was done doing plowing his roads. No, I never did that.
Well, and did you see any need to obtain a situation report? Or did you already know what the heck was going on?
There's no situation report if there's no situations.
So you knew what was going on,
Yes.
right? Because you'd been at the command center, correct?
Yes.
You'd been out on the road sometime.
And at times I would send Mr. Knorr updates on my cell phone at the EOC. If there's anything of concern, I'll contact you. And there never was. So it's not like I wasn't in touch with him.
Okay. Now, conclusion, the bullet point entitled conclusion on page 4, Mr. Knorr states, you claim that you have always performed your duties as an employee of the town with integrity and professionalism. And do you still believe that, Tim?
Yes, I do.
And Mr. Knorr states that based on his investigation, he cannot substantiate those claims. And further, that you certainly have not demonstrated integrity or professionalism by taking credit for work you should have done, but in fact was performed by others. Do you believe you've taken credit for work that you should have done but was performed by others?
No.
And how did that statement make you feel as an employee of the town of Summers?
It hurt. These people were my friends. I had no other issues. There was nothing except a late MOA, and never heard any concerns. Nothing but praise and, keep doing the good work. So this, it kind of, it floored me. And
You'd had no inkling before this that your job was going to be terminated, did you? By this, I mean the June 11th, the June 6th and then June 11th. Did you have any inkling?
no.
Okay, do you want to take a minute?
Nope.
You sure?
Yep.
Did you perform your job to the best of your abilities?
Yes.
Did you ever give less than 110% to the town of Summers?
No.
Has your health deteriorated in the last 5 years?
Yes.
How so?
A broken back, hip injuries.
And in fact, you were scheduled to have back surgery right around the time of these memos. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, the job position of emergency management director from 2014 to 2019, in your opinion, would you say that the requirements of the position and the amount of work involved have increased, decreased, or stayed approximately the same?
Increased.
And why? What duties have increased over that period of time?
Just by state regulations, updating the EOPs, the emergency operation plans. That's a task in itself. That would take somebody doing full-time work, I don't know how long, to update those plans. And they came out with a new template. And just the day-to-day runnings of the department. There's something that always comes up, and I can't remember every single detail of what came up from day to day, but being there 4 or 5 hours a day part-time, I did the best I could with what I had.
And of course, emergencies and storms and things of that nature took precedence over that paperwork, like updating
Yeah.
certain plans.
Yes.
And did the amount of hours that you were working in 2014, did it remain constant through 2019 at 29 or 30 hours a week?
Yes.
I mean, some weeks would be a little more, maybe, and some a little less.
Yeah.
But on average, it was budgeted as a part-time position of 29 or 30 hours.
Yes, it was.
Okay. Now, are you able to do your job as emergency management director? Are you
Yes.
physically able?
Yes.
Okay. So, back in June, were you physically able to do your job?
Yes.
But you do have a disability, correct?
I do.
But you were still able to do your job?
Yes.
Okay. And did you inform anyone at the town of your disability?
It was kind of common knowledge.
Mr.
And
Mr. Nornu, do you believe?
yes. And Miss LaFleur, I told her that I was, I had to go in for another surgery, and jokingly said, geez, I hope I don't lose my job. And actually, she brought that up during our closed meeting with Mr. Knorr. If you're so worried about losing your job, why would you say that? And we've been saying that jokingly for years during elections and stuff like that. And then when she brought that up during our private meeting, it kind of floored me, because we were saying it in jest, jokingly, and she knew that.
Okay. I don't have anything further, but I would like to, at the end, make a brief closing statement.
Okay. Anyone have any questions?
No.
You can make a closing statement.
Okay.
Excuse me, can anyone speak?
No.
Mr. Knorr's memo of June 17th stated that based on his investigation, he's decided that it's appropriate to recommend that the Board of Selectmen dismiss my client from his position due to his lack of performance. And I would argue to the Board of Selectmen that there is no lack of performance, and there's no evidence of any lack of performance, that Mr. Knorr rushed an investigation because he had already decided that Mr. Kratos' job was to be eliminated. Not the position, but Mr. Kratos' employment was to be eliminated. Mr. Kratos doesn't know why. I don't know why. But I do know that Mr. Kratos should not have been dismissed for lack of performance. If there were other reasons, we don't know about those. We weren't informed of those, but certainly it wasn't for lack of performance. And so I believe that this board should do the right and honorable thing and reinstate Mr. Kratos to his position as Emergency Management Director. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Can the board please make a motion to enter executive
I move
session
to go into executive session.
for the purpose of discussing legal communication?
Second that. In favor? Aye.
And just to make sure that no decision will be issued tonight, so we're going to take off.
Correct.
Wonderful. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, George.
Thank you all.
I think for this.
What is that, a microphone?
Yeah.